What is up, everybody? Welcome to Comic Book Club. I'm Alex, and pregnant pause to wait for other people to answer and weigh in with their names, but there's nobody else. There's nobody else here this evening. It is just me coming to you live in a couple of places on the internet. We are live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube, we're live on Twitch, X/Twitter, Instagram. Maybe you're listening later, wherever you get your podcasts. It's all good, but it is all me. Just Justin and Pete, my co-hosts, are off this evening. Nothing bad. They're all doing good. They just had other obligations they needed to take care of. So I'm taking it solo. I'm not too worried about it because we have two amazing guests for you this evening. But I will mention later in the show, I am going to need all of your help because we're going to do a Q&A portion still. And I'm just one person. So think about your Qs. I'll have some A's. We'll do that later in the show. Also, a little later in the show, we're going to bring in one of our absolute favorite guests to have here. It's been a while since we've had him on, Greg Pak. But first, we're going to bring in another amazing guest. She is the creator behind Archie Comics, the Wicked Trinity. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Maggs. Sam, welcome. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for your video viewers live tonight. I'm so sorry that I'm not on camera and also that I sound like this. I had surgery on my throat not too long ago, and I'm still sort of in recovery, but very excited to be here and appreciate you accommodating me.
Oh my gosh, thanks for accommodating us. I can't believe you had throat surgery and you came on a audio podcast. I appreciate that. And I'll do all the talking. You just sort of nod silently and we'll be good.
No, perfect. That's great. That's my favorite podcast.
That's how audio podcasts work. I've completely lost the plot without two co-hosts. Let's talk about this book. This book is great. It's coming out from Archie Comics tomorrow. It is bringing together a bunch of threads that have seeded in different ways through stories. We've talked about this a lot here. We've had on various Archie Comics guests, but they've been doing a bunch of different one-shots that are not so loosely tied together. We found out recently that some of them are building up to this cursed library, interconnected multiverse thing. This is potentially part of it, but more so, it's bringing together three Sabrina Spellman villains, mashing them together into this Wicked Trinity, and then seeing how they do as probably not heroes, but at least the heroes of their own story. As it says in the back matter, this, or at least Jamie Ratante's claim this, you can refute this claim if you want, that this was a dream of yours to write this. Yes. Why was that? Why did you want to write Wicked Trinity? What drew you to this idea?
This was just so in line with all of my favorite things and everything that I loved to read growing up and still love to read now. I was a witchy girl from the jump. I was named after Samantha Stevens from Bewitched. Oh, wow. There was no shot for me. Like, I was always going to be a Crystals girly. Like, that was, it was always on the table. And then growing up, I was always really fascinated. I read, all of those book series, like Teen Witches. I watched Sabrina, I watched Charmed. It was always my favorite genre of story. And as I have grown up and become a professional writer, my favorite characters to write, and I think you can probably see this through my oeuvre fiction, I really love a morally gray female character. I really love writing about female friendships, and I really love writing about magic. And so those three things together in this one project for me was so exciting. And the fact that, as you said, Archie is doing a lot of really awesome work with these one-shots and taking risks and taking chances and setting up new big things. And I do think that this one-shot is a part of that. It has a pretty... It has an ending that has a big impact on the rest of Riverdale society. I'll say that much. So you definitely don't want to miss it.
I also don't want to spoil it. I have read the book and it is super fun, but even more specifically, you've got this trinity of characters here per the title. You've got a witch who has fire powers. You've got one who has water powers, one who has more nature focused powers, and they're all non-human, or at least one of them is witchy. One of them is a siren. One of them is a nymph. Is that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like a forest nymph. You got it.
Okay. So what is it specifically about these characters that is interesting and makes them work together as a team or not?
this was such a fun opportunity because the Wicked Trinity had appeared in a couple of issues previously, but honestly had not really been in Archie Comics that much. So one of the things that Jamie approached me with, um, which I found really cool about this project, was that they really wanted me to flesh out the characters a little bit more. Like they had, names, their basic powers. We had kind of like a, one or two sentence idea of who they were, but diving more into that, they really let me make more in-depth character profiles for them and dig more into each of their backstories. And I think it's interesting to think about the different ways that they feel ostracized or neglected by mainstream society, for being the way that they are. And they all have different reasons for their each of them having kind of like a chip on their shoulder. And I think like rightfully so, for being othered, for being treated differently, for not being able to be their whole selves. You know, that makes lots of people into more villainous characters than they might want to be otherwise. And to me, like as a queer person, as a woman, as someone who's in like a lot of marginalized communities, I find that kind of relatable. Like I understand how being put down, or allegory for closeting, or whatever you want to say, will kind of like can, in a lot of cases, if you don't have great family support, or if you don't have good community support or a good community structure, can fester into resentment, into spite, into a lot of, it's a lot of pain that has to get transmuted somehow. And Amber, Jade, and Sapphire also happen to have magical powers. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting in for me. I mean, everybody loves Sabrina, and I love Sabrina, but there's more than one witch in Riverdale, and what is life like for the rest of them? Yeah.
Well, I mean, to that point, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that Sabrina is pretty much off screen, but I think very present in the text at the
Thank
same
you.
time. Um, why that choice, and what does that do to these characters to not have her there, but kind of like always on their mind?
I think that that's often the way it is when you put yourself into an adversarial relationship with another person,
Mhm.
um, that they like don't even necessarily know or think about. Do you know what I mean? Like, have you had
Mhm.
those people in your life where you're like, that's my nemesis? And they're like, I
No,
don't
I'm friends with
I don't know who
everybody,
you
but go
are.
ahead.
Like, but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
someone in your mind that you build up because you're jealous of them, or you're envious of them, or they were born in a position of privilege that you weren't, or people are more accepting of them than they are of you, or they've had better opportunities than you've had, or et cetera, et cetera. They've worked harder than you. Like, there are so many things that can, again, like fester in a person's mind that they've kind of like invented for the most part. And
Hmm.
so it was important to me in this issue that Sabrina very much be a construct of their imaginations, as opposed to like a very real person and character with her own needs and wants and challenges on the page. Because I think for these gals, they, especially for Amber, they're like beyond the point of thinking about her that way. They very much think about her as like a 2D caricature.
Hmm.
Um, the witch who has everything that they want, who has everything that a person could want: acceptance, the ability to like be free, an accepting and loving family. Um, I don't. They're teen girls, like they're caught up in their own anxieties, um, and they're not in a position to be empathetic to her. And so I wanted to keep her as like a sort of specter. Um, yeah. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
I mean, on the teen note, I wanted to, and I'll mention this, I'll describe it a little bit for anybody listening to the audio podcast. But one thing that I was really struck by, you have this whole opening where you have the Trinity, they're casting this big spell. It's dark and mysterious and candles. And your first really big punchline in the issue is a teacher comes in and flips on the lights and is like, okay, it's 3:30, magic club is over, you got to go home.
Yeah.
And it's such a great punchline because it also gets back to that core of Archie Comics, the idea that these are characters in high school that
Yeah.
we get away from a lot.
Yeah.
So, what was the thought process there in terms of getting them back and setting them very specifically in this teen time and place?
It has a lot to do with their specific brand of impotent rage, I think. Which is that when you're an adult, you have more of an ability to solve your own problems. As a teenager, you're just reliant on everyone else. You're turning through the school system, the extracurricular system. You have to listen to your parents. You have to listen to teachers. Like, you don't have a lot of opportunity to shape your own destiny during that time. And so I think that, like, this is thus the cause of much teenage rebellion. And this is their version of teen rebellion. You know, they want to be able to feel like they have control over something in their life, but at the end of the day, like, they do have to leave school at 3:30. Like, you know, we can only do so much here. And that, I remember that feeling really well as a teenager, and feeling constrained by society's rules, and the ways that that plays out through the rest of your life is really interesting. But it was important to me to show that, like, yeah, they have magical powers, but they are also like regular kids who have like regular kid stuff to deal with on top of that. And I think that makes everything just that much more difficult and more complicated.
Yeah. Now, you touched on this a little bit, and again, without giving away necessarily where it goes, this book, and I don't say this dismissively, is very much middle. You know, mind you, that's sort of the part and parcel of the comic book industry.
Yeah.
You're always kind of in the middle of the ongoing story.
Yes.
But
Yes.
when you're tasked with something like this, when you're basically like, okay, these characters have been set up, they're in this place, we got to get them to this other place. What was the mission there, at least? Whatever you can talk about as described by Archie.
Yeah, this is a tough one, and it's something that I've had to do quite a bit in both my prose novels that I've worked on and in comics, of course, because as you say, there's always 100 years of history that comes before, and then whatever big crossover is coming in 8 to 12 months that you have to like prep for. You know, there are always these other concerns outside of just like tell a good story in a good ish in 20 pages, you know, or 22 as the case may be, you know. And so something that we really wanted to consider with this one is the challenges of that very specifically are, it does still have to be a full story with a beginning, a middle, and an end in those 20 pages, even though you're starting in media res and you're ending on a cliffhanger almost always. There still has to be satisfaction within those 20 pages, right? And so for me, that's the most challenging thing. Archie kind of came to me and said, like, we would love for this, however it ends, to have some sort of bigger impact on the like Riverdale Archie community as a whole. And so I sent some pitches about what that could look like, and they really honed in on one, which was cool. And the other side of it was, like I had said earlier, they had set up these characters. Jamie herself, who is a genius, I think, like, had set up these characters in an earlier issue. There had been a little bit with them, but because there wasn't a lot of content involving them, we also needed to set them up more individually as characters, kind of give them each their own individual personalities, try to sort of explain a little bit about the group dynamic also, because we know that Amber's sort of like the quote unquote leader, but you know, what is each of their relationships with each other? Where are the challenges, like being a teenager? Social issues are paramount, you know, like, so each of their individual relationships and the group dynamic was like a big thing as well. So that was kind of, those were my instructions from Archie. Here's where we left off. We'd love for it to impact things in a greater scale, and we'd also really love to get to know the girls and their dynamic more.
Cool.
So that was sort of my starting point.
Yeah. What about Lisa Sturl? Her art is great in this book. The characterizations are so good. I love everybody's expressions in particular. What was it like working with her?
I mean, I'm a massive fan of hers. I could not believe that she agreed to do this project. When Jamie told me she was going to be drawing the book, I was totally in shock, because I'm like a practicing witch now. I've had Lisa's Modern Witch Tarot for years. I have her Modern Witch Journal. Like, I have so much of her sort of paraphernalia, which is all so beautiful and so magical. Her Modern Witch Tarot, sorry, now I'm just going to like fangirl about her, but her Modern Witch Tarot deck is literally my favorite tarot deck, because it sticks so closely to the original Rider-Waite deck, but modernizes it in like the most beautiful way. I just think she's such a genius about it and so intentional, and having someone who's so like genuinely locked in on like the magic of the world on a book like this was so cool. Like I just feel so lucky to have gotten to work with her on this, and I think the book is beautiful.
I can't believe you just dropped "I'm a practicing witch" 15 minutes into the interview, but I do need to ask you about
Probably
that
should have
now.
led with that a little bit earlier, but yeah. I mean, that's part of my jam. I have my altar in my house. I love to read tarot. I love my crystals. I have like a hermetic magic school that I go to here in Los Angeles. Like, it's a very big part of my life. All my candles and my moon rituals, and like, say what you will, but this is who I am. This is where I've landed after my religious deconstruction and youth of religious trauma, being a queer person. This has healed me in a lot of ways, and so cool to be able to bring some of that to this book.
Well, I mean, I think that's great, first of all, but when you are a practicing witch and you are taking this obviously very seriously and it's an important part of your life, how do you then apply that to fictional witchcraft in Archie Comics in the town of Greendale?
Yeah, I think actually this is what made this project such a good fit in particular, because the Chilling Adventures books and the Archie horror books are not, like, they take it seriously. Like, they're scary and gory and creepy. Like, it's not played for laughs. Like, it is a little bit, and it's still a comic book, right? But it's, at the end of the day, some pretty serious stuff happens. Which we kind of get to in these 20 issues also, where, like you say, we open on this kind of gag where they've like drawn a pentagram in blood on the floor of their math classroom or whatever. But at the end, like, some pretty, there's some like actual gore with what they're doing. And so it was cool to approach a project like this from the perspective of like, yes, they're teen girls. Yes, this is like kind of silly. Yes, it's a club, like whatever. But like, at the end of the day, it is real, and I think energy is real, and I pretty firmly, I'm like committed to this stuff. I believe in it, and so it was cool to be able to bring that aspect into the project and not feel like they were asking me to like make light of it or make it sort of silly, because I think that there is a real, I know that there is a tendency to, whatever teenage girls like, for the masses to sort of like infantilize it, like the Beatles, Justin Bieber, One Direction, like whatever you make of the way people laugh and make fun of crystal girlies, like all of these things that girls, young women like, we really tend to disparage because we think that the fact that young girls like it makes it inherently silly, frivolous, not worth paying attention to. And so that was kind of the vibe that I wanted to bring to this, where it's like, yeah, haha, Teen Witch is funny, but also like they can turn you inside out if they want to. And you should take them seriously, because like there's nothing more powerful. And I started in this industry by writing books about fangirls and fandom. To me, there is nothing more powerful than like the passion of girls and women. Like, you better watch yourself. You know what I mean? Like the Beliebers will ruin your day. You want to say something about Taylor Swift? I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
I have experienced this. I have occasionally been like, go, yes, let's get him. So I hear you, and I believe you on that. I believe you on that, even.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm more of a Taylor Swift girly, so I'm glad we got that. But
yeah. Well, this is all great. I can't believe that came out towards the end there, but I love it. I
know my poor publicist at Archie Comics is going to be like, you were supposed to lead with that.
No. That's probably my fault. He probably said that. And then I was like, sounds good. And then right out of my brain. So I apologize. But I don't know how much you can talk about this. Again, I don't want to spoil too much. But like you said, there's a huge tease at the end of this issue. Yeah. Is that potentially something you're going to be involved in? And I'm being vague for anybody who reads listens to this podcast. After they read it, they'll know what I'm talking about. But are you involved in this thing that I'm bouncing around anyway?
God, I hope so.
Okay.
I have no more information than you do, right? Jamie, if you're listening, please hire me again. I know I was late on my deadlines. I'm so sorry. I would like, the real answer is that I would always love to do more for Archie. I think they're really on the cutting edge of what is cool in like IP-based comics right now. I think they're taking a lot of risks. I think they're not afraid to experiment. They never question the inclusion of queer characters or diverse characters, which is so important to me. Like, I've just had such a wonderful experience working with them and with Jamie and the whole crew. And if there's ever any more Wicked Trinity stuff, I hope I'm on the roster somewhere, because hell yeah.
Yeah, me too. Great issue.
Oh,
Congratulations. Can't wait for people to read it. And please stop talking to me. Rest your throat. Rest up.
Alex, thank you so much. This is such a delight. And yeah, if I really look forward to hearing what people think. You can find me online. I'm just my name, SAMMAGGS, on TikTok, or sorry, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on TikTok, I'm at Sam Writes a Lot. And thank you again, Alex. I appreciate your time.
For sure. Congratulations. Have a great night.
You too.
All right. There we go. Once again, the book is called The Wicked Trinity. It is out from Archie Comics tomorrow. Very fun. Even if you haven't been reading all the horror stuff, all the witchy stuff, you should be able to jump right in and get what it is. If you know what witches are, if you know what teenagers are, you'll be able to catch up. Let's move on to our next guest. Very excited to have him back here. As I mentioned earlier, he's the creator of the new book, Lawful, which is coming out tomorrow as well from Boom Studios. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Pak. Hello.
Hello. It's very good to be here. I feel like it's been, I don't even know how long. It's been years.
Yes. I see you on, without calling out where you are, I see you on the street every now and again, so we bump into each other. But in terms of the show, yeah, it's been a while. Like I told you off camera, Justin Pete, very bummed to not be here to talk to you, particularly Pete, who every single time we talk about one of your books on the stack is like, so we're having Greg back on the show. And I'm like, I'm trying, man. We're talking. We mentioned it. So, but I'm very excited to have you back for this book. This is so good. Like I mentioned, it comes out tomorrow from Boom Studios. And I'm going to give the broadest overview, but you jump in and let me know what I've gotten horribly wrong. It takes place in this world, or rather a city. Maybe it's a world. We only really get to see the city at the beginning, where if you do something that is against the law, it starts to show physically on you in different ways, in different monstrous ways. So that's the basic fantasy premise. We're following this main character who is always trying to do the right thing, and is pushed in different directions. Again, I don't know how much you want to spoil or talk about, but the main thing that I'd say about this premise, beyond, I think, just it's a smart, fun, very unique fantasy premise, I did not expect to be so emotionally affected on a gut level by it, because I think beyond, and this is what the best fantasy does, but beyond what you're setting up here is like cool comic book premise, Greg, is it really gets to what a lot of us, and I'll even say very specifically me, feel on a daily basis about always trying to do the right thing and always feel like if you do something wrong, people are going to see it and it's going to be this scarlet letter on you. So I assume, at least in part, that's where the idea came from, but I'll stop talking and kick it over to you.
Yeah, no, I'm really, I'm thrilled to hear you liked it. It's very few people outside of the folks who are directly working on it have actually seen it. So as it gets out into the world, it's very exciting to hear that it's resonating. I think, yeah, I mean, for those of us who are kind of, by upbringing and instinct fall into those lawful categories on the D&D chart, I think the book may resonate. It is that kind of, I mean, I've described it as one of the most fantastical things I've written, and also one of the most personal. I mean, I think we're in the middle of Men's Mental Health Month, and last week was Mental Health Awareness Month, so I think this is all very appropriate. I'll just dive right in with too much information, but I've struggled with anxiety, you know what I mean, and have I struggled with what what therapists sometimes refer to as moral perfectionism, where you kind of like, you have these incredibly high standards for yourself, and if you ever fall short of them in any way, even in an imaginary way, then you punish yourself for it, and so, like you said, it sounds like you're wired somewhat similarly in terms of, worrying about screwing stuff up. And there's a certain point when when I realized that it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about being, there's a part of it that's also about being perceived as having done the right thing. You know what I mean? And like, it's this fear of shame and of ignominy and all that kind of stuff. And that it also comes down to, there are rules that are imposed upon us, and then there are rules that we come up with for ourselves. And sometimes, and rules, there's a difference between doing the right thing and doing the legal thing, for example. And so the story is a way to take that anxiety to its extreme, you know what I mean, and say, okay, all right, that's what you're worried about. Let's make it even worse, so that every time you do break a rule, it shows up on your face and your body. You know what I mean? Like you break a rule, you grow some scales on your chest. You break some more rules, you grow a crab claw. You know what I mean? And everybody can see it, like literally on your face. You start to turn into a monster. And then it was and from that point, it's a question of like building a society. What kind of society would form around that? How would that, that sort of physical manifestation of rule breaking be used for societal control, all that kind of stuff? And then what's the impact on actual individuals living in this world? So we've got two main characters. We've got Sung, who is the trying to be a good boy. He was the son of one of the city's champions, who's basically the chief enforcer in the city, the kind of knight in white armor kind of character. His father's dead. His mother is a doctor, well respected, but sick. And they live in the inner circle, the servants' quarters in the inner circle. And his mother only has access to the medicine she needs because they live in the inner circle. So Sung has to be very good. He's studying for the clerk's test so he can become part of the bureaucracy of the city and maintain this good position. Meanwhile, that's his friend Eris on the cover with horns in the background. And Eris has always been, a more rebellious person. She's got a cheetah tail and paw and horns. She doesn't care. She's having a good time. She's like, lighten up, Sung, live a little. But he can't afford that. So he and Eris have sort of gone their separate ways. But as the events of our story kick in, they're thrust back together, and big decisions have to be made with life and death stakes. And it's all about right and wrong, but what may seem right may be wrong. And it's also about, like finding yourself and making your own choices, for better or for worse. So it's been a very gratifying book to work on, just because it's digging deep, and I'm at the age where it's like I'm done with irony. You know what I mean? Like I'm done with detachment. You know what I mean? Like everything is hard on sleeve. I'm going for it every time. You know what I mean? Like I don't have time to be detached from the world. I'm gonna dig deep into the biggest questions and emotions that I can, and the fact that it's resonated with folks is huge. This is the cover you're seeing right here is by Erica Henderson. She's done some variant covers for us. Amazing. The interior line art is by Diego Galindo, who is amazing. Diego and I worked together on the Stranger Things Tomb of Yibwin book, which was one of my favorite things that I've worked on in the last few years. Again, a very emotional story. And I just love what Diego does. I mean, he's got this sort of, he's Spanish, lives in Spain, and you can see that sort of European art style influencing his work. He's dealing with really sort of natural proportions and realistic rendering, but he's got a great eye for the fantastic, and I think the combination of those naturalistic proportions and fantastical elements really has impact. You know what I mean? It makes the fantastical stuff feel really real. And Irma Knivilla is the colorist. Irma colored Ronan Island, which was a book I worked on a while back, and also did the coloring for Who Belongs, which is a Asian American history book I did for the New York City Department of Education. Jeremy Arambulo did the line art. She's got this gorgeous watercolor style that's just so organic, and I just love it to pieces. She even put like kind of a paper texture behind there, very subtle, but the whole thing just feels really analog and tactile and real, which is just really fitting. Like this whole thing's about like, physical body transformation and emotion, and the more real and tactile it looks and feels, even on those most subtle levels, the better. So I've been really blessed, thrilled to work with this creative team. Simon Boland's the letterer. Simon lettered he's lettered so much stuff, including all my other boom books like Mech Cadet U and Ronan Island. It's just fantastic to be working with him again. And Chantel Larocque is the editor. Chantel's been fantastic. We actually have a call every Thursday where we get on the phone, just talk through whatever we got to do. And it's so funny because working in comics, like, you'd think we'd be on the phone all the time, but it's so fast paced that we're not as much as we like to be. You know what I mean? Like back in the day when I was working on Planet Hulk with Mark Paniccia, we would literally get together in New York like every week or two. We'd go to this really rundown pizza joint around the corner from the Marvel offices, and we'd like sit in the back in this little dark corner, and we just cackle and have so much fun. And like that kind of just one-on-one brainstorming, bouncing ideas stuff, like that's solid gold. And so I'm thrilled to be able, that Chantel and I have been maintaining that vibe, and it's the best thing about working in comics is actually working together in comics. You know what I mean? Because so much of the deadlines are so crazy, and we're just working so hard all the time. So having that, taking that time to breathe and just sit with somebody and talk it through a little bit is amazing.
Yeah. Before I forget, we're going to get back to the book in a second, but I do want to mention that every week on the show, we have a real professional chef down in New Orleans. His name's Brett Macris. He just opened a restaurant called Wild South, and he either curates or creates a cocktail for us. And this week, he was inspired by Lawful to create a cocktail called Unlawful Good.
Oh my God.
And it has rum, vodka, lime juice, raspberries, strawberries, simple syrup, egg whites, and ice in it. And it's basically a delicious blended drink that has a little bit of wickedness to it. Just like, just a
gosh, that is hilarious.
So there you go. I didn't have a lot of the ingredients, including vodka, around, so I did not make it this week. But it sounds great, and his cocktails are already great, always great. So I wanted to.
Oh my God, I'm reading the fine print here at the end. It says, "This makes about 2 cocktails, so give some to a friend. Now go forth and break the law, at least the ones that make no fucking sense. Cheers." That's the spirit of the book there, right there. So that is hilarious. The spirit of the book, if you will.
There you go. I get it. Good pun. So
I don't even drink, and I'm pretty delighted by that. So
you could probably make a mocktail version.
Please pass on my thanks to him.
For sure. He's watching right now, and he's a Christian, so he must either be off or in the kitchen. I'm not 100% sure, but Stray Bullet says, "Is there hints of the Scarlet Letter in this?"
That's really funny because I had not thought of that. It hadn't been in my mind when I was coming up with all of this, but yeah, I mean, like that actually, I actually should go back and reread Scarlet Letter now. But this came up the other day. I'd read another Scarlet Letter reference, and it was like, oh yeah, there, like that whole thing of like wearing your sin on your body is definitely part of that. I mean, in Scarlet Letter, like you commit your sin first, then you're discovered, and then you're forced to wear it. Here, the timeline's a little different. Your sin shows up, and then you're discovered. But no, there's something. Yeah, that's fun.
I mean, on that note, I feel a little. I don't think this is a spoiler. I apologize if this is spoiling something, but the main character, as you mentioned, he gets these lesions on his chest, I guess is the best way of describing them. They seem to be in the shape of a heart, or roughly in the shape of a heart. And the female character is wearing a heart shirt in the opening scene when they're younger. Am I just making connections there where there are no connections? Or?
I'm gonna pull a Harlan Ellison, who was once told, according to one of his introductions to one of his stories, he was once asked if this story was a reference to Orpheus descending to the underworld. He was like, "Oh yeah, sure, yeah, definitely." He had never even heard of the myth at that time. So yeah, that's definitely the plan. Honestly, it was not explicitly the plan. I mean, although Diego, I mean, who knows? Diego may have done that intentionally. He's growing scales, and as we'll discover as it goes along. But I like those little touches. I mean, there is something to that in the sense that, when you first see Sung, he has no color. You know what I mean? Like he's wearing these very drab clothes, and while Eris has, you know, it's like she's wearing, you know, like she's got like a magenta colored shirt or whatever, you know, she's got the heart patch and all of that. She's got orange hair and all. She just pops a lot more. He'll definitely pop, you know, for better or for worse, he's going to pop more as the story goes on. But that's, you know, that's kind of part of it too. It's like, I don't want to spoil too much either, but sometimes we turn ourselves gray if we don't take risks, right? You know, so there's some, you know, there's some subtle color storytelling here, color theory in the storytelling, I suppose.
The title is Lawful, obviously, and you touched on alignment charts a little bit earlier. Is that something that's going to play in a little more, or did it just feel like a catchy title? Like, this is, just to be clear for any of the listeners, this very explicitly is not like a D&D series with all those creatures. It's a totally different original fantasy world. So how will that play in?
It's really, I mean, it's there's, it's not a direct, it's not a D&D tie-in or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like we're, I think it's a fun name just because we have a way of thinking about ourselves because of games, you know what I mean? Because of alignment charts and all of that. And also because of other things too. But we have categories for how we, you know, how we think about ourselves. Sort of the same way, you know, like people will be like, oh, if you were in Lord of the Rings, which, you know, would you be Rohirrim? Would you be Gondor? You know what I mean? Like, would you be in Hobbit? Everybody would be in Hobbitown, let's face it. I don't think any of us would be in Rohirrim, you know what I mean? Like we're all just nerds. But there is, you know, but that we've, you know, these are ways for us to think about our tendencies and all of that kind of stuff. And so that whole notion of lawful and we're in a kind of fantasy context. So those things made sense to just, you know, to use that reference. What was I going to say? But yeah, beyond that, no, it's its own world. I mean, I want to do a little shout out to Diego and to Chantel for helping me conceptualize the whole look and feel of the world. I had this, you know, I wanted it to feel really real. I wanted to have fantastical elements. I wanted to not have a lot of modern technology, you know what I mean? Because I wanted to really focus on organic and analog life, you know what I mean, without these kinds of, you know, digital distractions. He said on via computers and wireless technology and digital everything. But I also didn't want to just do, you know, straight up medieval style, you know, like typical high fantasy, right? So I just wanted to feel real and modern at the same time. So I mean, the backstory is, imagine a world where 3 generations ago, 75 years ago, a big chunk of a big city was plucked out of the city and reappeared on an alien landscape. So it's like this chunk of a city from the late 70s or early 80s that's just been plunked down into the alien landscape and then cursed with this curse that if anybody, you know, breaks the rule, then they start to turn into a monster bit by bit. And where would that city be now 3 generations later? And this is where we're at. So you've got like, you know, like the champion's got like a old, you know, like, so he's got some like armor that's been made. He's also wearing like, you know, parts of an old like bulletproof vest, you know, and he's got an old you know, plexiglass police shield, and he's got a sword, you know what I mean? So it's this kind of combination of you know, old the old tech is stuff from, you know, from the 70s and 80s, and then the new stuff is the medieval stuff that they've built, you know what I mean, and that they've made, you know. So you've got like Eris has a t-shirt, you know, with a heart on it, but it's not printed, it's stitched on, you know what I mean? So you've got these like you know, little kind of like wooden, like a wooden pub, like medieval style wooden pub built into the base of a, you know, of the remnants of an old skyscraper, stuff like that. So, and then the whole city's overgrown with this kind of wild vegetation and everything. So I just love the look and feel of it. And
I think it's great too. And I'll give it a shout out. Just, it feels like Brooklyn, honestly, to me. And I think part of that is that, like, it just feels like a city that people are living in. It's not like you're saying, this is a fantastical fantasy city, and over here is the dark demon pits. Maybe we're getting there. I don't know. It's just the first issue. But it mostly feels like, yeah, here's a bunch of brownstones. There's a bodega on the corner. There's people walking around. Some of them have leopard claws, and that's going on. But otherwise, we're just kind of living our life here. And I love that mix of the banal and the fantastical that comes through very clearly in the book.
There's something fun also about living in New York City. I mean, I came out to New York City for film school, and I've been here ever since. You walk around Greenwich Village, and it's like people can literally be dressed like anything, and no one cares. You know what I mean? It's just whatever. You can. It doesn't matter, you go and so that's part of the feel of it in a way, you know what I mean? Like you could walk around and you got a horn, you literally have horns. I mean, I'm sure I've passed people on the street who literally have horns, and it's like, I actually, you know what? I remember being on the subway, and there were like these folks going out clubbing, and they all had like cat's eye contacts, you know what I mean? And it was just like, everyday kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Like it's like the guy, I don't know if he's still around, but the guy who used to walk around with a cat on his head in Washington Square Park. That guy. That's New York.
Exactly. So there's so that's sort of the vibe. But at the same time, there is this, as we'll learn. I mean, maybe there are more New York City analogs than you might think of, because I don't think you get that same vibe in every neighborhood in New York. You know what I mean? And there's definitely within New Sanctum, the city that we're talking about, there are places where where the elites live, and where if you got if you got monstrous appendages on you, you're gonna get side-eyed, and probably the guards are gonna come check you out. You know what I mean? So there's this real hierarchy, and this a very strong authoritarian and conformist streak that's laid over this whole city, So, like developing all of this has been, I keep using the word organic, but the process has felt really organic as we've, because at first I was just thinking about all this, and then I started working on it with Chantel, and then we pulled in Diego and Irma and Simon, and it's like every time somebody else comes in, then it's like, oh yeah, and then there's this other layer we can do, and here's more, you know what I mean? So it's been just really gratifying. I love this kind of thing. I mean, I guess I'm, like from Planet Hulk on, this kind of world building has always been a lot of fun. But to your point at the very beginning, it only works if you have characters you care about. So it means a lot that the characters resonated with you. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, to get back to that a little bit, or actually to contradict that a little bit. So obviously it does have these emotional stakes, and it is very grounded in these characters, and it's grounded in this emotional thing that clearly at least you and I feel, and I assume other people feel as well. But I also know you're a very political guy, and I think there's interpretations of this book that gets into current politics and current American politics in particular. I'd love to hear you talk about that versus my own either non-interpretations or interpretations of it.
That's interesting. I don't want to over-interpret it for people. I mean, I do know, sometimes people like to say, oh, it's not political. Everything's political. You know what I mean? Like if you do a book that's entirely non-political, that's a deeply political thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Like that says a lot about the world you're living in and what you think you should be doing. And, that speaks volumes. I do think we are in an age in a terrifying age of increasing authoritarianism across the world, and frankly, fascism, bigotry, and coercive police state violence. All of these horrible things are increasing, and there's a lot of pressure on people to, what's the term? Comply in advance. As fascism rises, there's a lot of pressure on institutions and individuals to, before even the fascists fully take over, people are, there's a lot of pressure on people just to, to accommodate. I mean, with all this book banning that's been going on, you see people who have, made or this anti-DEI stuff and everything. You see people before the rules even come down, they're cutting back on programs, and they're pre-banning, but it's very scary, right? And so this story shows a society where that becomes an even more all of those tendencies, I think, get accelerated and exaggerated, because if you break a rule, it's right there on your face. You know what I mean? There's no hiding it, or at least at this stage in the story. And so yeah, it's a way to kind of explore those consequences and see how good a world is that to live in. We'll see. But what was did you have, I'm curious, what was your takeaway?
Well, it was almost like a anti-political thing, because I feel like there's a worse writer than you would have made this into some sort of cancel culture thing, or is like,
right.
And I read that and I was like, this is definitely not what he's going for here. That's
no.
But yeah.
So. That's interesting. Yeah, no, that hadn't even. I mean, yeah, I hate that stuff. I mean, I hate that complaining. Just say you're sorry. Just say you screwed up.
It's okay.
Everybody, actually, that's kind of to the point of this. I mean, I'm not. This is not a book about cancel culture. I'm not interested in that. But there is a. But that's kind of part of this thing is that. What's the very worst thing you imagine is going to happen when you're anxious about stuff? You know what I mean? And we can always imagine really horrible things, but sometimes when the very worst thing happens, sometimes the very worst thing that happens is absolutely devastating and it destroys us, right? But sometimes we're just spiraling and we're freaking out about stuff that we don't need to be freaking out about, and that very worst thing happens, and it's like, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's not great necessarily. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to lose our jobs. We don't want to, like, have people we care about mad at us. But sometimes people get mad at us, and we don't instantly die. You know what I mean? Like we and if we're wrong, guess what? You can apologize. You can actually acknowledge what you did wrong, because we're human, and by definition, being human, we are imperfect. We make mistakes, and all I
was going to say, just to jump onto this is something that's taken me a really long time to get around to and learn is, once you apologize, you can move forward and maybe fix the problem. Like, the longer you sit there and spiral about it, you're like, oh God, what's going to happen if I tell this person that I screwed up, or I did this thing, or I imagined I screwed up, the worse it's going to get, while the problem's going to exacerbate itself, versus being like, oops, my bad, I did this thing. Whenever anybody has ever done that to me, I try so hard to be like, thanks for letting me know. Here's how we're going to fix this problem. We're going to work on it and just not make this mistake again. Or alternately, if you make this mistake again, we'll say, oops, you did it again, and then keep going as long as you own it. But it's so hard. It's very easy for me to tell other people that. It's much harder to own it myself.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, it's very hard to do in real life. Also, we could talk about this all day long, but there's so much of, this is also a very Asian American book, I think, and everybody has a different Asian American experience who's Asian American, you know what I mean? But so I'm not claiming it's like a universal experience, and there's millions of people who are not Asian American this is also going to resonate, as you have said, but there is that kind of maybe it's an immigrant thing, maybe it's, or like, if you're a member of any vulnerable population, then I think there's a decent chance that you have grown up feeling like you cannot make a mistake for your own safety. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I definitely had the feeling that if I ever did anything wrong when I was growing up, I would get caught. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I remember, this is ridiculous, but I remember when I was in 7th or 8th grade, like, after school, everybody's pouring out of school and people are just like running around. It's mayhem. It's 1980, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, so this is like Gen X kids going haywire because we were all haywire, and so kids are doing all kinds of stuff. They're chasing each other down, they're fighting, they're like throwing stuff around. And I'm walking outside the school, standing on those steps, and because I'm 12 years old, you know what I mean? I just, like, for the heck of it, I threw my English book, you know what I mean? And literally, there's 100 kids running around doing stuff. But right at the instant I threw that, I heard a teacher yell my name. You know what I mean? And then I got into trouble. You know what I mean? And it was like, and it was just so much. It was like, okay, I'm the only Asian kid there. you know. And I'm half Korean and half white. And when I was a kid, I think it was. I mean, now I'm more ambiguous, I think. But when I was a kid, it was very clear that I was the Asian kid. You know what I mean? And I just knew it. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, so if I do something, people are going to notice, and I'm going to get in trouble. You know what I mean? So I better not make any mistakes. You know what I mean? And I think so. So there's that kind of, that sense of vulnerability that comes from all of this, and that's real too. You know what I mean? Like that's real to this day for a lot of us. And so it is. So there's a degree to which it's ridiculous, but then there's also there's some social societal stuff that makes it also part of it is somewhat rational. But how do we not destroy ourselves and lose ourselves forever in anxiety and actually live our lives? So those are the challenges, and those are the things that we're directly addressing in every panel and every page of Lawful.
I do want to very quickly ask you about a couple of other projects, just because you have so much great stuff going on. I mentioned this to you in person, but I'll say it again here on the podcast. My son has told me this is his official critical reaction. The Lilo and Stitch book that you're doing for Dynamite is the best of the Disney books, and he reads all of them, so he loves it. What has the experience been like writing that and expanding that mythology in a very big way of that world?
It's been great. I mean, Nate Cosby, who I worked with back in the day on the Hulk and Hercules stuff at Marvel, he's an editor, and he's pulled me in to work on a number of Dynamite books over the years. But he just he gave me a call, and he was like, "Greg, Lilo and Stitch," and I was like, "Oh my God," because Lilo and Stitch was literally my favorite of all the sort of new generation of Disney animated movies. Just loved it when it came out. I mean, and that's partly because I'm Asian American, and I, had family in Hawaii, and this was, and the main characters are Native Hawaiian. They're not Asian American, but I felt seen when I saw this. Jason Scott Lee voiced the David character, and so there was a kind of Asian American vibe to it, and then it's just gorgeous. You know what I mean? I've talked about this kind of watercolor look that Irma's bringing to Lawful, and those backgrounds in Lilo and Stitch it is just beautiful watercolor style backgrounds, and it's 2D animation that's just lovingly done, and it's and then it's got these really, I mean, I remember just being blown away by it, because Lilo literally gets in a fight and bites a girl within like 3 minutes, and the characters the two main characters are just colossal screw ups. They're these kids, Stitch is a alien sort of monster built for destruction. But he's also a kid, right? You know what I mean? Like Lilo and Stitch, it's like these two kids who have zero self-control, who have, ultimately have hearts of gold, but have so much, they struggle so much to just kind of fit into this world that that was just incredibly appealing. And just the fact that they were screwing up every single all the time. They're just like, it's kind of funny talking about it now when I'm talking about Lawful. I mean, there's a lot of kind of fantasy, for somebody who is, I guess, so high strung and trying to do the right thing all the time. I'm a person who really gravitates to writing characters like Lilo and Stitch and the Hulk and Darth Vader. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot. The Hulk was always my favorite Marvel character. That whole visceral enjoyment of seeing somebody lose it and smash stuff. Usually stuff that needed to be smashed in one way or another, is really gratifying. So characters behaving badly has always really appealed to me. And then it's got this incredibly strong emotional and thematic stuff going on with Ohana and family. And in the books, we've brought in the idea of kuleana, or responsibility. So, I mean, it was all just such a great package to work with. And then the cherry on the sundae was the creative team. And we've got this incredible artist, Julia Giacomino, who draws and colors, and Jeff Eckleberry is the letterer, and Moana McAdams came on board as a cultural advisor. She's Native Hawaiian, and she's a children's book author, and she actually is from the island that Lilo is from. You know what I mean? It's like this ridiculous combination of perfect things. And I knew writing this book that I I'm Asian American, but I'm not Native Hawaiian, and this book is so entwined. This storyline is so entwined with the character's cultural identity. I didn't want to just wing this, you know what I mean? And I wanted to make sure we were getting it right, and we brought on a Native Hawaiian consultant, and Moana has been amazing, just a really great partner throughout this whole thing, and so
is it weird having Moana as a partner on
I know it is pretty funny. Yeah, that's or she had the name first,
There you go.
But there you go. Yes.
She owns it.
Yes.
You mentioned Darth Vader, and that's actually another comic that you have coming out tomorrow. You have Darth Vader.
Oh yeah, that's
47 is coming out on stands. I won't spoil any of that. I've read that one as well.
Oh,
but
cool.
it is wild the directions y'all are taking the Star Wars universe in. There's like Lovecraftian horror notes that are coming in here. I continue to love one of the things that you and Charles also do, and a lot of the other Star Wars writers are take a critical eye to the things that, on social media, people are like, here's a 140 character thing about something that makes no sense about Star Wars. And then you go, well, actually, how can we work that? How can we sort of fit that into continuity and play with that in some way? And that feels like a big part of what you're working with here, what you have been working with. Talk to me about this arc in particular.
Yeah, well, so this is the rise of the Schism Imperial. And so we've done a whole ton of stuff over the course of all these issues, but we're in this. We're really tying together a lot of the stuff we've built over the course of this more than 4 years on this book. It's been amazing. It's my longest run on any single comic book.
Really?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Wow.
I mean, I may have written more Hulk issues, but in terms of a single series sequentially, I've never. This is the longest, which has been amazing. So what's the easiest way to put this? Okay, so Darth Vader, there's a group of disaffected Imperial administrators who have decided that the Empire is falling apart, and it's all screwed up because the Emperor is just a force of chaos. He's causing so much trouble. He's really inefficient at doing the evil stuff that we want to be doing. He's he's chaotic evil. They're lawful evil, right? You know what I mean? And so that's basically it. They're tired of all this chaos, and they want to finally find a way to rein him in. And sort of the hook is that no one's more powerful than a lowly bureaucrat in the exact right place. That these low-level bureaucrats that everybody's ignoring actually have access to important little fulcrums and ways that they can influence things. So that's one of the working pieces here. Meanwhile, Vader has decided that he needs just to acquire all the power in the world because he knows that the Emperor basically is going to, there's the rule of two in the Sith. There can only be two. They're a master and the master and the apprentice. And apparently that's the Emperor and Vader. But the Emperor has made no bones about his interest in Luke, and he may just and Vader at the end of Empire was like, "Come with me, Luke. Together we will rule the Empire. We will overthrow the Emperor, and we will rule." And Luke was like, "No," as we all know. Actually, he wasn't like that because he was like this. Actually,
yeah,
his hand had been yes, so Vader knows that his time may be limited unless he can actually finally prove himself more powerful than the Emperor, and so he has been, over the course of our storyline, acquiring all of these different ways to augment his power, including a massive heist on Exegol to steal a giant chunk of kyber crystal. Kyber crystal is the crystal that powers lightsabers, and he's done several other big things in order to increase his power. So it's all heading towards a huge showdown.
Can I throw a theory out to you, because
yes.
He does have that large kyber crystal? Is he
Yeah.
going to make an enormous lightsaber, like one of those large pencils, one of the large novelty pencils?
Yes, exactly. We used to collect those large novelty pencils when we do road trips. We had a whole We had like a shoebox that was filled. Actually, I think they're too big for a shoebox. They were in something though. But yes, yes, he's gonna have a 40-foot long lightsaber.
Excellent.
That's his big.
I mean,
his
you
big
probably can't talk about this because it hasn't been solicited yet, but this is, I assume, leading up in some way to Darth Vader 50, which is coming out in September.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, which is going to be a huge issue, and you do not want to miss it. I'm hugely proud of it, and I'm incredibly lucky to have been working with everybody I've worked with on this run. I want to give a special shout out to Raphael Yanko, who has been the main artist throughout, and just killed it every single day in every single way. It's funny because for a long time, some of our main characters in the book were characters like Vader, who wears a helmet, Ochi of Bestoon, who wears a helmet, Zed, who is a robot, and so it's all of these characters with immobile faces, and Raph still was able to sell every moment subtly and emotionally, just using body language and shadow and stuff, and it's just incredible. You know what I mean? Like it never feels like miming or anything like that, and it's just so naturalistic, and it's been perfect. So I've been thrilled.
Awesome. Listen, I could probably talk all night, but I'm sure you have to go do other things. Is there anything else you want to plug though before I let you go?
I will plug something. I am finally finishing up a book called 35 Millimeter Love Letter, which is a how-to book and memoir about 35 millimeter film. Shooting analog cameras like this one, which is actually this was the camera I had in high school, Canon new F1. It was the biggest single gift anybody had ever given me. My mom bought this for me after my other camera got stolen out of a high school journalism room. It was like $500 in 1984. It's like ridiculously big gift, and it's my only. I don't tend to get really attached to physical objects, but this is one of my very treasured possessions. I after my mom died, I had it fixed up, repaired, and I have I dove back into analog photography. She's the one who taught me photography after she died. Went through all of her old photos and just fell in love with the look and feel. Went through all my old photos, and I was like, I need to be shooting film again. And that's what I've been doing for the past few years, and crowdfunded a book, and now I'm finally finishing this how-to book. So if you go to 35mmloveletter.com, you can pre-order the book. It's going to be a digital book, and hopefully it's going to be done in the next month or two. Finally. And then if you go to gregpakshop.com, you can actually buy used cameras, because
That's so cool.
I kind of got on this whole thing, and I just started learning more about different cameras that I hadn't used back in the day, and bought a bunch of cheap ones and fixed them up and learned about them, and I wrote about them for the book, and now I need to clear some room in my small New York apartment, and so I'm starting to sell some of them off. So they're all film tested, and they're all really cheap. I'm not really trying to make a killing here. I'm just trying to get them back out in the world. So gregpakshop.com. If you use the word spring when you check out, that's the code. You get 20% off. How about that?
Ooh, love it. Greg, that's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Congrats on the book. I can't wait to see how much Lawful stresses me out as it continues. But it's so good. And always great talking to you.
Likewise,
Please,
Alex.
Hopefully we can have you back on when Justin and Pete are here. So
yes, let's do it. Let's do it. I should have some more stuff to plug later on down the line, and always a thrill talking to y'all. And thank you so much for having me. Seriously, and I really am moved and happy that you like the book.
It's so good.
Thank you so much.
It's great. Have a lovely night, Greg. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. Once again, that was Greg Pak, and the book is Lawful, out tomorrow from Boob Studios. Also check out Darth Vader 47 from Marvel. That is also out tomorrow. They're both awesome, awesome books. And folks, we're going to move on with our next section, which is my favorite section because you all make it up. It is your audience questions. And for audience questions, please, I beg of you, drop some questions in the comments over on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, X/Twitter, not Instagram. Actually, I guess you could, but I would have to look at the window on my computer that is Instagram, and let's be honest, that's just not going to happen. But I will start off. We had a question before the show began. Mr. Oli posted this at 6:30 a.m. I'm not quite sure why or what brought this on, but it was the first comment we got. Batman Court of Owls trade paperback #1 2024 compact edition. I hope you guys can review it and show on camera the size of this trade paperback. Normally I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Why do you ask? Except for the fact that somebody handed me a copy of it today, so I actually have it on hand. I've been really interested in this. I did see this in the store the other day. I think we talked about it on the show, but it is this new format that DC is doing as of this month. They're publishing what they're calling DC Compact Comics. They're a little larger than manga size. And not only that, they are, here, I'm showing this to people, by the way, on the live feed. If you're listening to the podcast, just know this is a full color version of the first 11 issues of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run on Batman 1 through 11. And it's the best part about it. I know I sound like QVC here, but it's $9.99. It's $10 for these books. And they've got like Batman Court of Owls, Watchmen, I think V for Vendetta. There's the Green Lantern book by N.K. Jemisin, Far Sector as well. This is great. Like, I think having really well printed copies of classic DC comics that are at an affordable price level. We've been talking so much on the show about how can you get people back into comic book shops. They're reading graphic novels. They're buying Scholastic. They're buying paper cuts. They're buying these other publishers that are publishing graphic novels that are not priced at $5,000 per to buy 100 issues. Giving people this sort of value in a thing that you could just like stick in your bag and it's not going to weigh down your entire bag, I think is really, really good. I haven't read it yet, this version. I, again, got handed it today, but I'm very excited to dig into it. And I will give a actual QVC style plug here. The reason it was handed to me, and I think I've mentioned on the show before, every summer, for the past couple of summers, I've been lucky enough to be asked to host a couple of sessions of the book club in Bryant Park, which is a big park right in the middle of Manhattan. And they have, in addition to bookie books, they also have graphic novels. They alternate them, which is very cool. And sometimes it's just me sitting there and chatting with somebody who works for Bryant Park, where they're like, so comic books, how do those work? Which is great for the people in the park because sometimes there's just people wandering through the park that being like, who are the people talking? I'm going to sit down for a bit and watch this. But for example, today I talked to Jadzia Axelrod about the new Hawkgirl trade collection of the first 6 issues that came out. Great conversation, very fun, really good time. July 9th, if you're in New York, we're going to be talking about Batman Court of Owls. It may just be me talking about it, but I can talk about it for an hour or two. I would be happy to. And then August 6th, we're going to be talking about Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong. Can't wait for that. That's going to be very, very fun. So there you go. There's my little plug out of the way. And thank you, Mr. Ollie, for your question. Let's see. I'm going to look down here for some other questions. I know there was one about Justin and Pete, what's going on with them. I will say Justin has been solo parenting for about a month and a half. He's talked about that on the podcast a lot. His wife has been doing a show in Spain, I believe, and he took the kids and went out there. So probably what he's doing right now is he got off the plane and then ran faster with one of those bulls that runs in Barcelona, just jetted straight out to let his wife take care of the kids for a while, and is probably having some fun Spanish wine and jambon. Nobody checked my pronunciation of that. As for Pete, he had some family stuff. I won't share that. Everything is fine, but allow him to talk about that if he wants. Let us see if there is anything else. It's just me. Usually I'll let Justin and Pete talk. Oh, yes, Schreikler says, how did the Bryant Park event go? Great. I will mention, just to talk about that a little further, if you haven't checked out Hawkgirl, I didn't realize it came out so recently. The trade came out June 4th. And if you're hesitant about Hawkgirl, it is one of the most complicated continuities ever in comics, I think. But what this book does so well is it really distills it down to what you know, while still working off the fact that Kendra, who is Hawkgirl, has been reincarnated multiple times. She has this really long legacy. When we pick up with her, the whole cycle of resurrection with Hawkman and Hawkgirl and Hawkwoman has been broken. So she's really alone for the first time. She moves to Metropolis, has a new cast of characters, has this very interesting fable-inflected villain that she's fighting the entire time. There's guest stars. I thought it was really well done. And it gets into some deep and very dark stuff as well, which I will say here was probably the part that I was most uncomfortable about, talking about in a public park, being like, hey guys, trigger warning for anybody who is in one of the largest parks in Manhattan, other than Central Park, obviously. But otherwise, Jadzia Axelrod, great talking to her about the book. It was very cool. Nelson Martinez Jr. says, have you seen the trailer for the Suicide Squad anime coming out soon? Any interest? I've not watched the trailer because I don't have a ton of interest, but I know people do. This is, I think, Suicide Squad Izaki. I'm sorry, I'm a terrible person. But this is coming out on Hulu. I do love the fact that they're doing mostly a weekly release for it because I think that's how people are used to watching anime on Hulu. But I will check it out for sure. Because we got to do that for the show. So there you go. Michael Even says, with summer around the corner, what was your fave family summer vacation when you were young, Alex? Ooh, great question. The one that I probably was most impactful on me was we spent, I don't know if it was 2 weeks. It definitely felt that way when I was little, but not that little. I was like 11 or 12 or something like that. But we drove around Vermont and pretty much every day would stay at a new place. We visited Burlington. We visited the Ben & Jerry's factory, but we also just like stayed at random B&Bs and places. And there was one night we stayed in a cabin and I could picture it so distinctly, even though it was years ago. And the reason is there was a bed here. There was a bed over there. For anybody listening on the podcast, there are 2 beds and they're in different places. I don't know why I need to describe that, except I can picture it in my head. At the end of my bed, there was a dresser, and on top of the dresser was a small bookcase with paperback novels that were left there by whoever was renting out this cabin. And there, I don't know any of the other books, but I do know there was Tommyknockers by Stephen King. And I was really looking something to read because whenever we went out on vacation, my big activity was, no, you go outside and do something. I'm going to sit in here and read, literally wherever we rent. And I had never read a Stephen King before. I had no idea what Tommyknockers was, but I was like, that sounds like an interesting title. And I read that, consumed that whole book over the course of however long we were in that cabin, fell in love with Stephen King, proceeded to read every single Stephen King novel over the course of that summer. So I don't know if that was the best summer vacation we ever had as a family, but it was certainly the most impactful for me in terms of A, getting me into Stephen King, B, getting me into horror, C, just opening up a whole world of different types of books. So that was pretty cool. Stanley says, do you like candy eating? Could you do more food tasting podcasts? Oh God, I am so happy, Stanley, you asked that when Pete isn't here. And I'll tell you the reason. So for anybody who doesn't know, we do a podcast all about Sweet Tooth called Candymen. And on every episode, we recap an episode of Sweet Tooth and then taste a piece of candy. It is a huge fight every time because Pete loves candy, has very specific opinions, and does not want to eat candy that he doesn't like, because this is a vehicle for him to go out to the store and get candy and eat candy. That's his main goal with the podcast. And I'm not saying anything disparaging about Pete. He's been very open and honest about this. After I think it was the first season of Sweet Tooth, he was like, that was great. So what candy do you want to try on this Doom Patrol podcast? And I had to be like, Pete, we did that because the idea of the podcast was Candymen. Sweet Tooth eats candy and loves sweets. So we ate candy and ate sweets on that podcast. It doesn't make sense to eat it on a Doom Patrol podcast that has nothing to do with that. And he was like, but people love it. And I want to eat candy. And again, it was a huge fight where I had to be like, we're not eating candy on our Doom Patrol podcast. That doesn't make any sense, Pete. And I think he still honestly resents me for it. So the answer there is maybe we'll do a food tasting podcast again. I think it is a fun device. I don't know if people agree, but I think the idea of like just even hearing people like wrestling with rappers and going like yum 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 on podcasts is very funny. That makes me laugh. So if there was an opportunity that came up with the show that made sense with the show, I'm happy to do it. Like we did a Hannibal podcast. We probably wouldn't eat human flesh, but maybe we'd cook a dish from Hannibal every episode or something like that. But we're not going to do it for our Marvel podcast. We're not going to do it for our DC podcast. If it comes up, maybe. I do love the device, but just for Candyman. That was probably more of a answer than you wanted. This is a question from Stray Bullet. Alex, what's on top of your Watchmen trade for anybody listening that is behind me on my nerd shelf? I'll show you. Here's the shocking twist. It's actually not a Watchmen trade. Hold on. I'm going to creakily move my chair and grab this from behind me now. So I'll go backwards to answer your actual question. This is a sonic screwdriver remote control, I believe. I'm sure Scheuchler could tell me, but I believe this is the Matt Smith Doctor, but I could be wrong. But basically, I kept it in the case because it looks nicer there. But you could use it to control your TV by twisting it and turning it and doing the controls the same way you do the sonic screwdriver on Doctor Who. But this is actually not a Watchmen trade, as you can probably tell from the smaller box. It is a Swatch watch that was given out for the Watchmen premiere party after New York Comic Con. So it's actually for the Watchmen TV show. And it is a watch. You can't really, there's no numbers on it. It's just all black on the face. And it just says tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And I just thought it was very cool. It has the little squid design that they specifically used for the show and everything like that. So I would wear it, but I like having it on my shelf and just knowing it's there better. So there you go. David Quinley says, how do you prioritize your comics given theirs more than anyone? Are you talking maybe way in there, David? Do you mean like how do we prioritize them on the stack, or how do I prioritize reading them? Just let me know. And I'm going to answer another question in the meantime. Edward Doherty says, what are the characteristics of success of classic superheroes? Interesting powers, visual design, backstory. I go a little back and forth of this. I would kind of say I fall on the side of visual design as one of the biggest things with classic superheroes, just being able to pick them out on the stands. And like, I was thinking about this recently, and I don't remember how it came up, but I was looking at some of the original designs of Batman. I think it was because of Bob Kane's birthday, maybe? I don't know. I'm making that up. Whatever it was, the original designs, he had like red on the costume and the ears were taller and maybe floppy, and it like wasn't quite right. And sure, maybe we would have loved Batman if he looked like that, but I think it is the iconic look of the character, even though he's changed over the years, that really draws us to him. Same with Spider-Man, same with Superman. They've changed. They're not the way they looked originally, but there was something about those looks that just resonate with people and you're immediately drawn in. And that was the whole goal when they started, right? It was a crowded newsstand with newspapers and magazines and comic books. And if you saw a superhero on that newsstand, you're like, that looks cool. You literally would judge the book by the cover, and they cared almost less about the interiors than they did about selling the cover and making that stand out against everything else. And a lot of what makes that stand out is the look of the superhero. But beyond that, I do think the long-term staying power is how much those backstories and powers resonated with people, how much, they were aspirational, or they resonate with the comic book reader, like Spider-Man in particular, I think is a really good example of that. So all of that stuff plays into it, but I don't know. If I had to pick one, I almost think it really just starts with, if you have an iconic superhero design, that goes a really long way towards selling your concept. Easy Reader says, do a drinking podcast. I believe we do. That is called Comic Book Club. It's the live show that we're doing right now. And I'm drinking a pineapple rum daiquiri, and it is very good. Easy Reader asks, Do you know Comic Storian? So this is a very sad thing to bring up. I don't know him personally. I believe his name was Bill Potter, but I could be wrong. But super, super popular comics YouTuber, had tons of subscribers to his channel, was really positive, very well known for his like deep dives into comic book history. And pretty shockingly, his wife announced, I believe it was late last night, that he passed away at age 40 for unknown reasons. Ben Potter, thank you all in the game. I appreciate it. And it was an unfortunate accident, is what she said. So we don't have many details beyond that, but I'm also not going to ask details because you got to respect the privacy of his wife and friends at this time. But really, really sad to have somebody die that young, let alone somebody who was so beloved by the comic book community, by the YouTube community, seemed to be doing it the right way, like hitting it, not being like leading into the algorithm and being a troll, but being positive about comics and lifting them up and being critical about them, but just really talking about them in an erudite way. So very sad, very big bummer. To turn to something a little more positive, Edward Doherty says, Alex, what is Pete's next secret quiz? Tell us while he's away. Does he actually have a secret quiz, or does he just make things up at the moment? No, he's been, I will say, without giving anything up, first of all, he was open with us, and he told me and Justin about it because we were like, thank you for doing that and not keeping it secret for 5 years. That's crazy. It is real. There are real prizes that he has already planned. He has it already planned. There is a secret phrase that will unlock it. So yeah, keep trying and see what you can do. There you go. And folks, I think that is it for audience questions. Thank you so much for sending them in, particularly as it is me solo. I appreciate that. Edward Doherty says, give us a hint, please. The answer is no, I will not. That's up to Pete. Sorry, Edward. But Justin and Pete should be back next week, but you know, what is still happening this week is new comics. And to give you some highlights of stuff coming out, I will mention, maybe this will turn some people off, but I also did the Stack solo. So little spoiler here, I actually taped that before. So you'll hear me talk about how we interviewed Greg Pak and Sam Baggs, but maybe some of the information is contradictory, so I already taped the Stack podcast. I don't know. Little fun peek behind the scenes, or terrifying peek behind the scenes, who knows. But in terms of the stuff I was really looking forward to, I've already talked here on the show about how great Lawful is. Definitely do not miss that. Check that out. Also, very intrigued. I was very intrigued by Gods #8 from Marvel, since that's the final chapter of that story from now. Curious to see how that ties up. A weird one that I'll give a plug for, Into the Unbeing #1 from Dark Horse Comics. If you like the movie or book Annihilation, I would check that out, because it's similarly people stuck in a weird landscape that always gets more and more horrifying as it goes. This one's out today. Suicide Squad Dream Team #4. I think Nicole Maines has been crushing it with the Dreamer character and really pushing her up to A-list status. If you're curious at all about the Absolute Power event, this is a big one, definitely not to miss. And the last one that I will plug, versus repeating everything that's in the Stack podcast, Akagun, Brutalizer of Gods #2 from Oni Press. This is from Murray Yodele and Doten Akande, who did I Am Iron Man, and it is so wild and intense as per the title. This guy who hates the gods, wants to kill the gods. Meanwhile, the gods kind of don't care and don't know about him. It's big, it's mythological, the art is absolutely stunning. Definitely don't miss this. And one that's not in the stack that I just had to stop somewhere because it was just me talking for 45 minutes. But David Cruz gives a shout out to Whisper Queen, another great book that's coming out tomorrow. Other than that, you can check all of those out on the Stack podcast that posts Wednesday, 9 a.m., both in the dedicated Stack feed and also in the Comic Book Club feed. And folks, that is it for this week's show. Thank you for sticking with me solo. I appreciate it. Again, Justin and Pete will be back next week, or most likely will be back next week. Sure, hope so. This is a lot of talking for me, and you like to hear from those other guys. But thank you to Greg Pak for coming on. Check out Lawful tomorrow from Boom Studios. Also, Sam Baggs for talking about Archie Comics, The Wicked Trinity. out tomorrow from Archie Comics. Next week on the show, Brandon Chen is going to be here to talk about Just a Goblin. We're going to have the team of Chris Ryle, Owen King, and Jesse Kellerman to talk about Self-Help, a book we talked about on the stack. It is a very fun noir mystery, so that should be great. Comic Book Club News, our comic book news podcast, Monday through Friday, short form news. Check it out. Candyman, our Sweet Tooth podcast, as mentioned, we're rolling out daily episodes leading up to our postmort on the whole series with Jim Mickle, so check that out. Also, The Boys is almost back. We are going to have daily episodes of Let's Hear It for the Boys coming out Thursday, Friday, and Saturday with all three of us. Don't worry, recapping the first 3 episodes of the show, and then that'll be coming out weekly after that. So check all of that stuff out. Patreon.com/Comic Book Club to support this show and all the shows we do. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Android, Spotify, or the app of your choice. At Comic Book Live on Twitter/X, Comic Book Club Live on Instagram and TikTok. ComicBookClubLive.com for this podcast and many more. Until next time, we'll see you at the Comic Book Club. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Really do appreciate you sticking with it, even though it was just me. It'll be a duo or a trio next week. Have a good night, everybody.